Okay, so the Talmud Yerushalmi brings a statement from four different great scholars of the Talmud in respect to tefillah. The first scholar says, I think it's Avrum, Miyomai. That means from all my life, all of my days. Lo hitzlachti Rechavia, I was not successful in having kavana throughout the entire Shemona Esrei. Lo hitzlachti does not mean he stopped davening. It just means that as he would daven, his mind would wander off from the focus on the tefillah, and he wasn't successful ever. That's maybe a kuzma, but that's what he said. Never in my life did I achieve kavana throughout the Shemona Esrei.
In Talmud what?
Yerushalmi.
What Rabbi? What Rabbi?
I think it was Rav Nuna. See, I don't remember for sure if it was him or not. But Shmuel says then, when I would daven Shemona Esrei, all of a sudden my mind would wander off, and I found that I was counting my chickens. And obviously he had chickens in his house. Maybe that's what he did for his business, whatever. Next thing you know, I'm counting my chickens, and I'm not focusing on the Shemona Esrei. The next month, the Omer was Rabbi. Rabbi says, when I would daven Shemona Esrei, apparently he davened in front of a wall, and all of a sudden I started calculating how many bricks were in the wall. The next month, the Omer, it could be, he was Rabbi Nuna, he says, when I would daven Shemona Esrei, all of a sudden I'd come to Modim and I'd bow and I'd say, how did I get to Modim? He didn't have kavanah. These are four great scholars. We're not talking about, Reform rabbis. These are four great rabbonim of the Talmud, and they each had a problem with davening with kavanah. So I discovered this Yerushalmi here while I was living in Israel. Now, of course, I don't want to tell you exactly how old I am, 78, but the point is, I never had heard of this in all my days in yeshiva. You have to have kavana, and then you see guys shuckling and going crazy, and kavana. No one ever told us this Yerushalmi, which would have given us some, some relief from the pressure of the yeshiva world pressing upon us how much we have to have kavana. So I went on the internet, downloaded this Yerushalmi, sent it to the head of the high school, the Nahal of the high school in Yeshiva Ner Yisrael. I said, why don't you explain this to the Avrum and relieve some of their tension, and tell them that it's really what if they intend to have kavanah and they try to have kavanah, it's good enough. It was good enough for these great scholars. Obviously, it's good enough for Avrum in yeshiva too. And give them some menuchas hanefesh, some relief.
You got the Musa?
He wrote me back, really, and he didn't know it either. He says to me, this is amazing, but I can't tell this to the Avrum because then none of them will have kavanah. So he didn't spread the word. Anyway, that was the Yerushalmi that I was referring to. So today, we will focus on this week's Parsha, which is Kedoshim. To you, we should be holy. And in this week's Parsha, there appears an amazing pasuk, which we are all basically familiar with. V'ahavta l'reyecha kamocha. One should love one's friend, one's neighbor, as one loves himself. Omar Rabbi Akiva, Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. Rabbi Akiva announced and proclaimed that this is an klal gadol, an extremely important principle of the Torah. Klal gadol, a great principle of the Torah, is v'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha b'chol. You should love Hashem. No, sorry, v'ahavta l'reyecha kamocha. Before we go any further, I'm going to point out a Ramban, which we will come back to the Ramban. The Ramban, you've heard of the Ramban Nachmanides? He asked a very interesting question. He says, the pasuk says, Lo sikom, lo sitor, do not take revenge, do different types of revenge. Es b'nei amecha, the children of your people, meaning another Jew. V'ahavta l'reyecha kamocha, ani Hashem. And you should love, one Jew should love his friend, his neighbor, as he loves himself. So, the Ramban asks a question. What do we say? V'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha. We should love God b'chol nafshecha. It doesn't say v'ahavta le Hashem, it says v'ahavta es. When the Torah tells us to love a convert, it tells us v'ahavtem es hager. No thanks. V'ahavtem es hager. You see me passing out. V'ahavtem es hager, you should love the ger. It doesn't say v'ahavtem legerim. It says es. How come when it says v'ahavta l'reyecha, it doesn't say v'ahavta es reyecha, like it says es Hashem, es hagerim? What does it say? L'reyech. Says the Ramban. The Torah is speaking to all Jews. Great tzaddikim, rebbes, rosh yeshivas, rabbonim, Torah scholars, and simple good Jews. The Torah cannot obligate a Jew to love another Jew like he loves himself. It's impossible, except for great tzaddikim who can do this. But for the hamonam, for the general public, the general Jewish public, it's impossible to command a Jew to love somebody else like he loves himself. It's not achievable by the ordinary Jew. So therefore, the Ramban says, it says lireyecha. What does lireyecha mean? To your friend. It means to be proactive to your friend. Ma'ata chasal kavoidcha, just like you are careful and concerned about your honor, chasal kavodo. Be concerned about the honor of your friend. Ma'ata chasal mamoncha, just like you are concerned about your own money, your own assets, chasal mamona. Be concerned about the assets of your neighbor, your friend, etc., etc. It's a proactive command. In other words, it's not necessarily an internal command. It's a command of how to act towards another Jew. So therefore, it says lit to the Jew. You should love your friend, your neighbor, your friend as you love yourself, meaning in actions, in deeds. Okay, let's just put that Ramban aside for a moment. Now we know what Rabbi Akiva said. Now the Rambam wrote a sefer called Sefer HaMitzvahs, in which he lists 248 positive mitzvahs and 365 losase, negative things. And he arranges them in a certain order. So, for instance, the first mitzvah that he lists is Yidias Hashem Emunas Hashem. Becoming aware of meaning believing in the existence of a creator, right? Knowing about him and having faith in him. That's mitzvah 1. Mitzvah 2, love Hashem. Mitzvah 3, belief in other words, have yiras Hashem. So we have knowing about God and that he's the creator. Number 2, loving God. Number 3, fearing him, have awe of God. Number 4, I'm sorry, that was 4. Number 5, Kiddush Hashem. What do you see from here? The Rambam is not listing the mitzvahs in the order in which they appear in the Torah. He's listing them in accordance with some hierarchy that he believes denotes their importance, their primacy. Of course, knowing of Hashem's existence, believing in Hashem, knowing that he's only one, fearing him, loving him, sanctifying his name, these are all the mitzvahs that he lists in that order because he considers those mitzvahs primary, fundamental mitzvahs. Mitzvah number 8 in the Rambam's list. The mitzvah is Shetzivonu Lakadosh Shemo. Okay, I'm sorry, that's test. Mitzvah Ches. Who should Tzivonu Lehidamis Bo Yusale Kifi HaYacholos. We should imitate and pattern our lives by the example of Hashem in accordance with our abilities. V'halafta b'drachav. You should walk in the ways of Hashem. What does this mean? Ma HaKadosh Baruch Hu nikra chanun, just like God is called compassionate, afatah heyeh chanun. Transform yourself and make yourself into a compassionate person. Ma'akadosh Baruch Hu nikra rachum, just like God is considered merciful, make yourself merciful. Forgive people. Ma'akadosh Baruch Hu nikra chosid, just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is considered a chosid, af atah hayeh chosid. You too should become a chosid. Okay, right? In other words, v'halachta b'drochav, you should walk in the ways of Hashem. Yes?
He's also called Ken Nekamot.
Okay, well, we'll see. You'll see, we'll see. We'll get to some of that. Ma'akadosh Baruch Hu nichasa to chosid kfar nichbo, it says, v'halachta b'drochav, walk in the ways of Hashem. And it also says, Anrei Hashem teilchu, you should follow after God. And that means, Hidamais b'pulaso, pattern yourself after God's interaction with humanity, hatovos, v'hamidos hanechbados, shetuar b'hem okel Yisrael, which God is described as in the Tanakh. Okay? That's the mitzvah of v'holafta b'drochav.
We skip the fourth one.
We skipped the number. I just wanted to show you that the numbers aren't just random. The numbers are in accordance with what the Rambam considers primary. So we see here that the Rambam considers among the top 8, number 8, pattern yourself after God, walk in the ways of God, imitate God. I forget how you say it in Latin, imiteo dato or something like that.
Imitatio Dei.
Okay, good. Imitate Hashem. That's the mitzvah 8 in the pattern or in the sequence of the Rambam's counting the positive mitzvahs. Where do you think v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha appears in the count? Remember one thing, there are 248 positive mitzvahs. Where do you think the Rambam listed v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha? What number? See, he's going in a number that he considers important. What number does he list in the positive mitzvahs? V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Take a guess.
The first one after everything concerning God.
Try 206. Mitzvah Reish Vav. Reish Vav. Tzivonu lehov, he commanded us to a love from one end of Am Yisrael to the other end of Am Yisrael. Kasheneh vatzmeinu, just like we love ourselves. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, like you. V'shetiya avoso v'chemloso la'achiv ka'avoso v'chemloso la'atzmo. You love your brother, you should love yourself as you should love your brother as you love yourself. In money, in body, in anyway, whatever you have, whatever control you have, love your brother. Mitzvah Reish Vav. 206 out of a possible 248. Ayu tochein, what is going on? Below, not only that. You know, the Rambam wrote the Sefer HaMitzvahs, setting out all 613 mitzvahs in accordance with his the way he figured the mitzvahs, because the Gemara says that there were 613 mitzvahs, but it never tells you what are the 613 mitzvahs. So the Bahag, who is called the Baal Halachas Gedolos, was a Rishon, lived before the Rambam. He wrote a sefer in which he listed all the mitzvahs. The Rambam listed all the mitzvahs. Rasaji Gon listed some of the mitzvahs. Along comes the Rambam, and he wrote the Sefer HaMitzvahs in preparation so that he could write his big magnum opus, the Yad HaChazak, or the Mishnah Torah, his code of law, so he could detail for us the performance of all the mitzvahs, all 613 mitzvahs. So first he had to determine what were the 613 mitzvahs. So he calculated the 613 mitzvahs, and he wrote Sefer HaMitzvahs, and he listed them. So we already discussed the problem. 206 out of 248. Of imitating the ways of Hashem, 8. Okay, now we go to Hilchot Deos. The Rambam wrote one of his chapters in the Yad HaChazak in the Mishnah Torah. He called it the laws of Deos. It's hard to translate Deos. Let's call it the laws of character traits. What are the important character traits? Perek Rishon, the first perek in Hilchos Deos. He says, Deos harbe, yesh l'kol echad ve'echad. We all have many, many characteristics. And there are differences in ourselves within our internal, emotional structure. We have different techunos. We have different things. For instance, we get angry. We don't. Sometimes we get angry. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes we're kind. Sometimes we're not. So we vacillate between various deos, and people are different one from the other. There are people who, the drop of whatever it is, they fly off the handle. They get angry. They're always angry.
It's up to their how they were brought up.
Well, it could be, but whatever it is, the Rambam will admit he's going to say a little bit like you said, but he's going to, and then supersede that by saying, ultimately you can gain control. But anyway, and if this man who flies off the handle all the time gets angry, he's angry for a long time. Then there's a person who never gets angry. You insult him, he doesn't get angry, he smiles at you. Whatever it is, and if he does get angry in the rare moments that he gets angry, 1, 2, 3, it passes. It doesn't linger by him. And there are people who are so arrogant, you wonder why they can put their neck down, because their nose is so stuck up in the air. Tremendously arrogant. And then there are very humble people. Shafel Ruach, he doesn't even have essence to him. He's like a doormat. You step on him, he doesn't care. That's
also not a good.
Well, yeah,
has to be a medium.
Let's let the Rambam explain all this to us, and he will agree with you. And then there is a person who just wants everything. He's never satisfied. He gets this, he wants a better one. He has a house, he wants a bigger one. He has a car, he wants a more recent model, or he wants a Mercedes. He wants everything the best. I'm not sure, they don't pay me to say it. Okay, so now, Yeshu Bal Taiva, Losis Banav, show me Halav B'Taiva. Yeshu Bal Leiv Tohor. And there's somebody who's just the kindest person you ever met. Below Yisave, and he doesn't want anything. Afilu Devorim Miatim. He's what we call in Hebrew mistapek b'muad. He's satisfied with a little bit. You give him a little bread, you give him a face, you smear some schmaltz on it, and he's happy. Okay? He doesn't even need what most people would consider mandatory for their health and nourishment. V'yesh bal nefesh Rechavia, and there are people who are shalot tizba nafsho mikol moment ha'olam. They are so gluttonous, so greedy, so avaricious, that whatever you give them, they don't have enough. They want everything in the world. They want to be the richest, the best, the fanciest, whatever. Kinyan Sha'omar, like the Chazal tell us, Oyev Kesef, somebody who loves money, Lo Yizba Kesef, will never be satisfied. He'll never have enough. Those are the kind of people. Yesh Mekatzer Nafsho. Anyway, he goes on and explains all of these different Natias, all of these different inclinations. So for every characteristic or every trait, there is an extreme on one side and an extreme on the other. But then there's the Dea Habeninus, there's the medium. And you're in the middle, just equidistant from both extremes. Okay, so there's the medium. We'll see what he says about the medium. But then he says there are people that are just born naturally kind. There are people that are born who have inclinations to be mean or to get angry, whatever. Their mother stepped on something when she was pregnant. Okay? Yes, b'chol hadeos, yesh mehem deos shehem la'odam mitchilas briyasa. They come innate with the person. The fiteva gufo, by the very nature. His very nature is to do this. V'yesh mehen deos shetivo shalodam zeh mechavein v'osid lekabel osam b'mehiri yosem mishar hadeos. And therefore, such a person, he's going to be more easily inclined to favor good traits because he's naturally a good person. But there are people she'einam la'odam etchilas brioso, It's not natural to you. You learn to be kind. Your mother's kind to you. Hopefully your father's kind to you. Perhaps your teacher might be kind to you if you go to a good school. Or he sees, he observes, he sees the world around him, and he says, that's a better way to be, and he follows that path. By observing the world and thinking. Or he hears, okay, fine. Then he says in Halacha Gimel, any one of these extremes is not the good path. And it's not proper for a person to go to extremes. Not to teach them to yourself to be an extreme. If he finds himself quick to anger, for instance, or he's the other way, he's a doormat. Or he already, by the time he wakes up, he finds I'm an angry person, the last angry man. And he's already accustomed to getting angry so fast. So how do you turn yourself back into being in the middle, to being a balanced person? So you should go in the good ways over, the Rambam says, over and over again. Do kindnesses. Don't get angry. Somebody insults you, bite your tongue. Do not get angry. Do not respond. And slowly but surely, by performing good deeds, by going the extreme, the opposite, you'll come out in the middle. You can balance your midah ra'ah by going to the extreme with the midah tova, if you do it over and over and over again until it becomes habitual, and then you can find the middle path. And what we call this middle path is the golden medium, the golden mid-ground. Now, the Rambam does say that arrogance, it's better to be a doormat than be a balgaiva. And there are great Hasidic, me doesn't mean Hasidic rabbis, they didn't exist in these times. It means pious people. Great pious people who, no matter what you did to them, they never answered. And the Mishnah says, Godol hamalivim ve'enu nelovim, people who are insulted and don't respond, HaKadosh Baruch Hu blesses them. So the Rambam says, when it comes to arrogance, you can be to the other extreme, meaning you can be so humble as you can possibly be. And in anger, the same thing. If you don't get angry, that is the better than if you're in the middle.
It also depends on what situation you're in. Let's say you're in a relationship with someone, you don't want to be a doormat,
Right.
And okay, you could be angry at the person, but you have to.
Right.
That's
Okay.
how you express it. Also.
Those are decisions that you make, but in the final analysis, if you're a doormat, you cannot be criticized. You didn't take up for yourself. You might get dumped on, but don't forget one thing: everything that comes about is only what Hashem has meted out to you, basically. And if you go and you are very humble and very, pious, you'll get rewarded in Olam Haba. It's very hard. It's very hard to take it on the chin, but that's, what it is. It says the same thing with giving tzedakah. It's not, you don't make yourself poor. You don't take all your money and give it away. For instance, like Rav Shlomo Kalbach, bless him, when he died, they had to take up a collection to pay for his funeral. And he made lots of money in his concerts. But what he would do is take all the money he made and give it away to poor people, to unfortunate people, to various situations. And when he died, only what he had was in his pocket. And even that wasn't very much. Those are the kind of people, says the Rambam, you should be a middle of the road. I just want to point out a misconception that many, many people have. Guy's a millionaire, or he's quite wealthy, very comfortable, and he says, you know what? I give tzedakah. I give the 10% of my money to tzedakah. I'm left with $10 million. I gave $1 million to tzedakah. There'll be plaques for him all over the world. He gave $1 million to tzedakah. He's got $9 million left. Okay, let's go to Abu Dhabi. Let me buy these 3 Mercedes. one I drive, one my wife drives, and one's parked in my driveway. Okay? I can do all this. I gave tzedakah. No. Hashem entrusted each of us with whatever assets we have. This is a trust. We see from Shemitah, Kili kol haaretz. Everything belongs to Hashem. You think you own your field? No. Come Shemitah, open the gate, let everybody come in, take whatever grows, and they can walk off of it. You can't charge them. You can't stop them. Why, says the Torah? Kili kol haaretz, because all of the land, everything that grows, everything that's produced belongs to Hashem. And Hashem says in the 7th year, open it up and give it away, or let everyone come and take it. Hashmatas kesofim. You lend somebody money. You think he owes you the money? Come Shemitah, you don't have to pay you back. The loan is vitiated. It's erased from the books. Why? Everything belongs to Hashem. When you understand that concept and you have $10 million and you gave $1 million to tzedakah, don't think the other $9 million belongs to you and you spend it whatever way you want. It's all the grace of Hashem. Ki li kol haaretz, li kol hamamon, li kol everything. Everything belongs to Hashem. And Hashem entrusted it to you. Do you think he entrusted it to you so you can run to Abu Dhabi? You think he entrusted it to you so you can have 3 Mercedes? You think he entrusted it to you so you could have the biggest house in the city? He entrusted it to you to take care of his people, to help another Jew, to help him in business, to help him if he needs food, if he needs a house, if his children need tuition. Hashem entrusted that money to you. Yeah, there's a bare minimum of mitzvah of giving tzedakah. That's for an ordinary Jew who makes an ordinary livelihood. Give tzedakah. Give 1/10 of your monies to tzedakah. For billionaires, it's a much greater responsibility. There's an entrustment. Hashem has entrusted this money to you, and use it for mitzvahs. Don't use it for luxuries. Okay, that's just an aside. Says the Rambam, as far as the obligation to give tzedakah, you give what you're obligated to. You don't clean yourself out. Okay, and another mitzvah to do with your money is to lend it. That's not a mitzvah of tzedakah. The Rambam says, "Malveu koroi l'mishitzara." If you have $10 million and you see another man struggling to start his business, give him a loan. Help him get started. Not tzedakah. It's a chesed. Why? Because it's an entrustment that you have this money. Do a mitzvah with it. Malveu koroi. Okay. And you shouldn't be frivolous. You shouldn't just go around partying, even if you gave tzedakah. Okay, fine. You always live a decent level of life, in peace, and always have smile and accept people in a good fashion. Okay, and if you do this middle of the road, you're nikra chacham. You're considered a wise man. If you go to the extreme and you're extremely humble, or you're extremely, like a doormat, you wave your honor, then you're called a chassid. That's what the Rambam says to a chassid. Not if you are a Hasidic Jew. If you're a chassid, if you can temper your anger and control it almost completely, and if you can temper your arrogance and control it almost completely. Anyway, the Rambam goes on and tells us a few more things, but bottom line, after 7 halachas, he says, Shenemar, because the Torah tells us what? Halachta b'drachav. The 8th mitzvah that the Rambam counts. You see how important this mitzvah is? A whole chapter, the first chapter of Hilchos Deos deals with this broad mitzvah, which assumes lots of things. Transform yourself to be a compassionate person. Transform yourself to be a chesed, a bal chesed, a person of kindness. Transform yourself not to get angry. Transform yourself to accept other people. Transform yourself to not be judgmental. Who is the person or the being, the power that's least judgmental in the universe? Hashem. Look what he does. He leaves Rechavia spitting him in the face. and he doesn't do anything. He is not judgmental. He gives you lots of rope. Don't be so judgmental. I want to tell you a yesod from the Netziv. The Netziv says that the first sefer of the 5 books of Moshe is called Sefer HaYashar. It's called the middle sefer Vayikra, Torah's Kahanim. The second sefer of where we learn about Yetzias Mitzrayim, Sefer HaGeula, the book of freedom, redemption. First one is called Sefer HaYashar, the book of straightforward people. All of the patriarchal figures, Avrum, Yitzchak, Yaakov, were Yashar, straight. Says in Netziv, you know why the second temple was destroyed? We all know it was destroyed to Sinas Chinam. What do you mean Sinas Chinam? They were great Talmidei Chachamim. The scholars of the Mishnah lived at the time of the destruction of the second temple. Why do you mean they hated other people for no reason, Sinas Chinam? Answer was, they were judgmental. This one's not firm enough. This one doesn't wear long devices open. You know what that is? He doesn't wear, socks like the Hasidim. This one doesn't have a streimel. This one doesn't have a gartel. This one has a blue shirt with his white shirt. He doesn't wear only white shirts. You know what that is? Looking down at other people, being judgmental. That's the sin of Sinas Chinam according to the Netziv. Well, we should learn in honor of your father's yortzeit, and the neshama of Moshe ben Baruch Shneir should have an ilui neshama in the olam ha-neshamas. Okay, so anyway, that's what the Rambam is telling us. The golden mean, balance your inclinations, go down the golden path, except for maybe those 2 special characteristics of anger and arrogance. You can go to an extreme and not be arrogant and not be angry. But everything else, you're called a chacham. If you go to extreme and you're never angry and you're never arrogant, then you're considered a chassid. Better than a wise man, you're a chassid. Shenemar, what does the Rambam say at the end? How does he close this chapter off? Shenemar, v'holachta b'drachav. Walk in the ways of Hashem. What is the derech Hashem, says the Rambam, the ways of God? When Hashem chooses Avraham, doesn't choose Shem, the son of Noah. He doesn't choose Aver, and Shem Be'aver had a yeshiva in which Avram Avinu studied, according to Chazal anyway. Why didn't he choose them to be the fathers of our nation, of the Jewish people? Because Hashem says, Ki yidaitiv, I, God, testify, I know of Abraham, of Avram Avinu. Ki yidati shelaman asher yitzave es bono ve'es beiso achro v'shomru es derech Hashem la'asos tzedakah u'mishpat. I know of Abraham and that he will command and instruct his household and his children after him to observe the ways of God, the derech Hashem. What is the derech Hashem? La'asos tzedakah u'mishpat. To do tzedakah, be gracious with your time, with your money, share it with others, and mishpat, always be honest, always deal justly. That is shenemar v'halachta b'drachav, walk in the ways of Hashem. Whole first chapter of the laws of characteristics. Now, where do you think the Rambam places the mitzvah of Ahavta l'reacha kamocha? First chapter, halachta b'drachav. Where do you think in Hilchos Deos, which goes on for chapters, where do you think he puts the mitzvah of Ahavta l'reacha kamocha? Take a guess.
10:09, didn't you?
No, that's in the number of mitzvahs. Now I'm talking about in his detail where he wrote his code. And he wrote a code of a halacha, first chapter of the laws of characteristics in the Rambam's code, dedicated to v'holachta b'drachav. Where do you think he writes in his code the mitzvah and the detail of the mitzvah of Ahavta l'reacha kamocha? I'll put you out of your curiosity, and I will tell you that it's in the 6th chapter, 3rd halacha, 2 lines. Turn to the 6th chapter. Hilchus Deos, Perek Vov, Mitzvah Gimel, Mitzvah al kol adam le'ehov es kol echad v'echad miYisrael kegufo shenemar v'ahavta l'renecha kamocha. This is astounding. Rabbi Akiva says this is the Klal Gadol b'Torah, and the Rambam seems to be ignoring what Rabbi Akiva tells us is the primary principle of the Torah. V'ahavta l'renecha kamocha, not to the Rambam. V'halachta b'drachav certainly supersedes it. Certainly, he lists it in a closer proximity to the first mitzvah of knowing God. What's the pshat? How do you explain this? So, when this question arose, my Rebbe, Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg, had already passed on to Olam Haba, to the world of the neshama, and I couldn't ask him this question. This question troubled me no end. Couldn't understand it. How can this be? So I decided to call up some friends of mine who studied under Rabbi Weinberg to see if any of them heard Rabbi Weinberg, our great Rosh Yeshiva, address this question. So one person, Rabbi Shlomo Porter, who is a rabbi, the founder of an institution in Baltimore, it's called Eitz Chaim. It's an adult education program. He's a Talmud of Rav Weinberg. He raised the question to Rav Weinberg, and Rav Weinberg addressed it. Let me tell you one thing. We will see that the answer that Rabbi Weinberg gave him indicates that Rabbi Porter, he should be well. He's got Parkinson's and should have a full shalem and mehera. He did not ask the question in the same context that we're asking it. He asked it to him straight out. Why is v'ahavta l'renecha kamocha the cardinal principle if v'ahavta b'drachav includes so much more? It includes not just to love him, but to pattern yourself after God, become compassionate, become kind, become merciful, do all of these things, pattern yourself after God, adopt the middle road, the Shvil HaZahav, as we say. Why does Rabbi Akiva, so he asked the question, why isn't that more important than v'ahavta l'renecha kamocha? So Rav Weinberg answered him with the Ramban that we mentioned before. V'ahavta l'renecha kamocha is to do to your friend. It doesn't say v'ahavta es renecha, it says l'renecha. Why? Because it's impossible to love him as you love yourself, generally speaking. Therefore, the Torah could not command you to love him as you love yourself, but it means to act towards him as you would want him to act towards you. So it's proactive. A deed means it's in deed. A deed is less important than a machshava. Okay? What is B'Tselem Elokim in a person? What is the godly image in each of us? Our cognitive ability. It's our ability to think. And therefore, when you think, that is, you work on yourself to convert yourself into a compassionate, kind, merciful, good person, you work on yourself to find the middle ground in your various scope of your deos, of your characteristics. It's an inward focus. You need to work on yourself. You need to train your mind. You need to train your emotions. You need to control your emotions. This all is machshava, with thought. Machshava is more important than... No, deed is more important than machshava. Why? Because deed is what you reflect in the world. And that, said Rav Weinberg, is v'ahavta l'renecha kamocha. That's deed. Transforming yourself. Maybe you'll succeed, maybe you won't succeed. Immediately treat your friend as you would want him to treat you. That is an action that requires immediate response, immediate action. That is superior. Therefore, Rabbi Akiva said, v'ahavta l'renecha kamocha is more important. It's the Klal Gadol as opposed to v'ahavta b'drachav. It's deed, and deed is more important because that is immediate. Treat him right now. You don't have to sit there and work on yourself. For instance, there's no mitzvah there's no bracha when you give tzedakah. Why is there no bracha when you give tzedakah? Why don't you make a bracha? Why is there no such bracha? Because here comes a poor person help me out. Wait a minute, and put on my gartel, got to put on my streimel, got to sit in the corner, I got to have kavana. By that time, the man's gone or he's out cold on the ground. So there's no bracha to a mitzvah. You got to react immediately. It requires you to react immediately. It's a deed that requires immediate attention. Yes.
Is a deed.
No, halachta b'drachav is mahu chanon afatah heye. Make yourself, transform yourself. That's an act of machshava. That can take you 2 years to come to that, to make yourself into that madrega, to that status. Giving tzedakah or helping a person is immediate. You can't sit there and wait, come back in 2 years, I'm working on myself. You can't do that. You got to respond immediately. You got to do the action immediately. Says Rav Weinberg, that's why Rabbi Akiva said, "V'ahavta re'echa kamocha," l're'echa is more important or primary to v'ahavta b'drachav. And that's how we answered the question. I have a very dear friend who's a big Rosh Yeshiva now. His name is Rabbi Yochanan Zweig. He's the founder of the yeshiva in Miami Beach. That's a place to start a yeshiva. Anyway, he is the Rosh Yeshiva of that yeshiva. He too needs a bracha to be well. Anyway, they asked him this question too. And he said the exact opposite of his Rebbe, our Rebbe. And he said as follows. The Rambam in the Shmona Prakim, we're going to have to go a little overboard today, I hope. So if anybody has to leave early, feel free to leave. The Rambam says in the Shmona Prakim are 8 chapters discussing various issues that the Rambam wrote as an introduction to Pirkei Avot. The ethics of the fathers, Pirkei Avot. The Rambam wrote an introduction to Pirkei Avot so that we should be able to more fully appreciate the Mishnayot that are listed in Pirkei Avot. And in the 6th parak of the 8 chapters, the 6th parak, the Rambam says as follows. Amru HaPilosofim, I may have told you this before, the philosophers said. Who is he referring to when he says the philosophers said?
The Greeks.
The Greeks, Aristotle, Plato, he's referring primarily to Aristotle. Amru HaPilosofim, the philosophers said, which is the person who is more ideal? Who is the better person? Somebody who has no inclination to do evil and innately just does the right thing versus somebody who has to struggle to do the right thing. He's not born with that innate feeling. He has to acquire it. So now, bottom line is both people only do the right thing. Wait. So who is the better person? The one who innately only does the right thing? Or the one who has to suppress his inclination to do the wrong thing, but he too only does the right thing. So the bottom line is they both do the right thing. One has to suppress his inclination in order to achieve a behavior that is correct, and one of them naturally is inclined to do right, and he never is tempted to do wrong. Amru HaPilosofim, says the Rambam, the philosophers say that the person who has no inclination to do evil is the superior person. Says the Rambam, initially we would think that Chazal disagree. Why? From Saragra. No pain, no gain. The more pain, the more gain. So if you have to struggle to do the right thing, you have pain, as you have to struggle, then you get a higher reward. If you get a higher reward, you must be the better person. So you would think that the rabbis and the philosophers disagree on this point. Says the Rambam, no disagreement. The rabbis agree with the Greeks, with the philosophers, with Aristotle. Why? Says the Rambam, it depends on the nature of the mitzvah. If it's bein adam lechavero, don't steal, don't kill, don't maim, don't harm, don't talk lashon hara, don't embarrass. It's much better never to have an inclination. You don't say to yourself, boy, I wish I could kill that no good for nothing. Or I wish I could steal, look at that beautiful diamond. I could steal it, nobody will know. I wish I could steal it. Well, what can I do? God said not to. That reflects a defect in your character. You're tempted to do something that is bein adam lechavero wrong. That means you have a defect in your character. You should never have an inclination to harm or act contrary to the interest of another person. But when it comes to Bein Adam Lamakom, that cheeseburger. I wish I could have a cheeseburger. Well, you didn't grow up with that problem. I did. Wish I could have that cheeseburger. Then you should say to yourself, yes, I really would like that cheeseburger, but what can I do? Hashem has commanded me not to eat a cheeseburger. Then it's the Tzara Adra. The more you have to struggle to do the mitzvahs, Bein Adam Lamokom, the greater is your reward. The philosophers did not have Bein Adam Lamokom. They didn't believe in any ritual mitzvahs. They only believed in Bein Adam Rechavia. So therefore they said that person is the greater person. He never had an inclination to do evil. He's the greater person. We who have Bein Adam Lamokom and Bein Adam Rechavia, it depends on the mitzvah. If it's Bein Adam Lamokom, we should not feel that we should have the right or maybe the power to hurt somebody. That's a defect in our character. Now, said Rabbi Zwei, what does that mean? That means when it comes to Bein Adam L'Chavero, you have to internalize it. It's not enough to just suppress your inclination. You have to transform your inclination. You have to say to yourself, I don't want to kill that man. I don't want to hurt that person. I don't want to steal that diamond. I don't want to do these things because it's no good. That is transforming yourself. So when you want to transform yourself and love your neighbor, that's superior. Because you don't want to harm your neighbor. That makes V'ahavta Re'echa Kamocha superior to V'ahavta B'drachav, because V'ahavta B'drachav is a mitzvah Bein Adam Lamokom. It's a mitzvah of between you and God. God is commanding you to work on your inner self. Your neighbor's not commanding you to work on your inner self. It's not a mitzvah Bein Adam L'Chavero. It's a mitzvah Bein Adam Lamokom. And you see from the Rambam that a Bein Adam L'Chavero is superior to a Bein Adam Lamokom, Bein Adam L'Chavero, because there you cannot have any inclination to do evil. That was his teretz. Both of these terutzim have one problem. The same problem. What's the Rambam talking about? Why didn't the Rambam put V'ahavta Re'echa Kamocha beforehand? It's a deed, according to Rabbi Weinberg. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's an internalization. Why didn't he put them first? Why did he put V'ahavta B'drachav first? Why does he stick V'ahavta Re'echa Kamocha, Perek Shishi, 6 Perek Halacha Gimel? He should have put it in the first Perek of Hilchos Teis. He should have listed it as Mitzvah 8 instead of V'ahavta B'drachav. He lists it as Mitzvah 206, way down the list. What's the pshat in the Rambam? Forget about the question of why did Rabbi Akiva select V'ahavta Re'echa Kamocha. The Rambam knew Rabbi Akiva. The Rambam knew the mitzvah of V'ahavta B'drachav. Why did he favor the mitzvah of V'ahavta Re'echa Kamocha over the mitzvah of V'ahavta B'drachav? So this question I'd like to address with your kind permission, and we will go a little bit over. So let's put Rabbi Akiva in historical context. Rabbi Akiva lived during the days of the Second Temple, the end of the Second Temple period. In fact, he lived through the Roman destruction of the Second Temple. He witnessed the destruction of the Second Temple. Our rabbis tell us that why was the Second Temple destroyed? Sinas chinam, senseless hate of one Jew to another, as we saw the Netziv define that, to be judgmental against fellow Jews, whatever. Sinas chinam. Rabbi Akiva was also Nosei Kelev Shel Bar Kaziba. He was the way the Rama puts it, the arms bearer. He carried the arms, Nosei Kelev Shel Bar Kaziba, and he called Bar Kaziba Bar Kochba. He changed his name from Bar Kaziba to Bar Kochba. Why would he do that? Because the pasuk says, "V'dorach kochav miYaakov," a star will shoot forward from Yaakov, in reference to the Messiah. And Rabbi Akiva thought that Bar Kochba was Mashiach. Not just thought, he acted on that thought, because he was the mentor of Bar Kochba, and he's the one who told, or supported Bar Kokhba's revolt. In fact, matter of fact, there's a girsa, a variation of the text in the letter of Rav Shvira Gaon. Rav Shvira Gaon was one of the Gaonim. And it was towards the end of the Gaonic period, which is before the Rishonim, before the period of Rashi and the Rambam, Tosfos. The Gaonim were the great scholars. Gaonim were the Rosh Yeshiva and the great academies, Sura, Pumbedisa, etc. Rav Shvira Gaon wrote a letter, which is called a letter. He wrote, let's say, we would call it an essay. He wrote an essay in which he traced the development of the Torah Shebaal Peh from Har Sinai through the conclusion of Shas. And Ravina and Ravashi finalized the Talmud Bavli. In the course of his writing about it, he wrote, of course, about the great Rabbi Akiva. In his Igeres or Shvira Gaon, according to some, the text reads that the students of Rabbi Akiva died not from a stomach ailment, as the Talmud Bavli says, but because they died in the revolt of Bar Kokhba. They died in war. Because Rabbi Akiva was the mentor of Bar Kokhba. He thought that Bar Kokhba was Mashiach. The Rambam puts it, I don't have that volume of the Rambam, but take my word for it. The Rambam says, B'dimu hu v'chol chaverav. The Rambam, Rabbi Akiva and his friends, meaning his peers, the Tanoim, the great authors of the Mishnah, shehu, that Bar Kokhba was Melech HaMashiach. V'lo noda lahem she'eno, they didn't realize that Bar Kokhba was not Mashiach, ad she'nerag, when he died. Once he died, they realized he wasn't Mashiach, which is one of the things that people tie on the Chabad's thing that think the Rebbe is Mashiach. The Rebbe died, he's not going to be Mashiach. They have an answer to that question, by the way, but I'm not going to get into that. But the point is that Rabbi Akiva thought that Bar Kokhba was Mashiach. Now, the Rambam writes this in his code. And then the Rambam says, how are we going to know who is Mashiach? So the Rambam breaks it down into two stages. One is going to be the Cheskas Mashiach. We should assume he's Mashiach. And one is going to be the Adata. You will know for certainty that he is Mashiach. So the Rambam goes through the various stages. He says if a man comes up and he has a lot of charisma, and he's going to be Lochem Milchemes Hashem, he's going to fight Hamas and Hezbollah, and he's going to fight all the enemies of Israel. Amen. Hashem, Korav Mamish, as the Rabbi should say. And he will do this, Lochem Milchemes Hashem. He will be machzir, he will return the Jews who are not affiliated, non-halachic, he will return them to the ways of halacha, Torah, and mitzvahs. And he will build the Beis HaMikdash. Then we know he's Mashiach. How can Rabbi Akiva think that Bar Kokhba was Mashiach? Rabbi Akiva lived through the destruction of the Second Temple. Why was the Second Temple destroyed? Sinas Chinam. Who made that assessment? Who says that the Second Temple was destroyed because of senseless hatred? It's not a pasuk. There's no Nevi'im. The period of Nevi'im ended. There's no Torah doesn't say that. The Torah ended when Moshe Rabbeinu finalized the words of the Torah. So it's not in the Torah. It's not in the Tanakh. Who said this? Who made that assessment? The scholars who lived through the trauma of the destruction of the Second Temple took a survey of the scene of the destruction of the temple, analyzed the generation, determined in their analysis that the sin of this generation was senseless hatred, and therefore the temple was destroyed. So now Rabbi Akiva is amongst the great scholars who assess the failure of the generation as being senseless hatred. If so, how can he think Bar Kokhba is Mashiach? The generation is guilty of senseless hatred, and the destruction of the temple was resulting. How can he now advocate Bar Kokhba is Mashiach? One of the tests of Mashiach is going to build a temple. How can he build a temple in the midst of Sinas Chinam? Therefore, Rabbi Akiva said, What's the antidote? What's the cure? V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Rabbi Akiva promulgated the great principle of V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha to blunt, to reverse senseless hatred. That was the sin of his generation. Now, when I was in the yeshiva, the Bali Musar, the great masters of the Musar, used to tell us, you know what the sin of your generation is, Kowalsky? Too much gashmias. You know, your parents came over or, resettled in the United States. Somehow they got there. They came with the shirt on their back. They didn't know English. They didn't have a job. They didn't have a place to live. They lived in a tenement. They stuffed themselves into these tenement buildings, barely eking out a living. They understood what it meant to live an Orthodox, a Torah life, because they were mistapek b'mu'at. They had very little. You're growing up. You got, how many shirts do you got? 5 shirts, 6 shirts? I don't know how many shirts you have. You got white, you got colored, you got a suit, you got a jacket, you have too much materialism. You need to be aware that if you get trapped into the pursuit of materialism, you diminish your spirituality. So they said to us students, this is the temptation, this is the Yetzer Hara of your generation. This is the evil temptation of your generation to supersede materialism and not to make your life the pursuit of more, but the pursuit of spirituality. Learn more Torah, do more mitzvahs, do more chesed, do more things for your parents, for your brothers, for your sisters, for your children, for your Facebook. That's going to become your major job in life. Pursue spirituality. Do not pursue materialism. What did Rabbi Akiva say to his generation? Your Yetzer Hara is senseless hatred. Therefore, you must learn to love another Jew proactively or whatever, internalize it, love another Jew like you love yourself. That will address sinas chinam. And if that, I am the Gadol Hador, I have 24,000 students. They're spreading this word all over on podcasts, on YouTube. They're spreading it all over Am Yisrael that the mitzvah is V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. I therefore can mentor Bar Kochba and tell him he's Mashiach and believe he's Mashiach. The Beis Hamikdash can be built by Bar Kochba because Am Yisrael will embrace my primary teaching. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Now, unfortunately, we are still mired in that sin of senseless hatred of one to the other. As the Nitziv explained to us, we are very judgmental. You don't have a black hat. You do have a black hat. You wear a kippah sruga. You don't wear a kippah sruga. We're constantly judging people. Your skirt's not long enough. Your face bust. Your shaitel's too fancy. We constantly are judging other people. And that's the sin of sinas chinam. That sin has remained with us from the days of Rabbi Akiva to 2024, 2024, Tovshin Pei Dalet. Therefore, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha remains the primary principle. We need to address that deep-seated, deep-rooted failure of our people, and we need to learn to love our neighbor, to love our friend, to respect another Jew, to not condemn another Jew, not to be judgmental to another Jew, simply or merely because of the yarmulke he wears or the hat he doesn't wear or whatever else it is that makes us judgmental. Therefore, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, says Rabbi Akiva, is Klal Gadol b'Torah. You want to know what encompasses more than V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha? V'ahavta b'drachav encompasses a lot more. It's to transform your character. It's to find the golden medium. It's to react to your friend properly, to be compassionate, to be merciful, to give tzedakah, like we said before, not just to give him charity, but to lend him money, to help him establish a business, to help him buy a house, to help him pay off his mortgage. These are all mitzvahs of v'halachta b'drachav. Imitate Hashem. That is a much more encompassing and far-reaching mitzvah than V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. However, the sin of our generation lingers from the days of Rabbi Akiva to our day. We are too judgmental, and therefore we are guilty of sinas chinam. And therefore, V'ahavta re'echa kamocha remains to this very day, klal gadol b'Torah. And that answers the question.